In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add 3D camera moves into any photo. To do this, we're going to be using Blender 2.8, Photoshop, and another free bit of software called fSpy. Before we get started, you'll need to go into the description below and download fSpy from the link and install it. And then once you've done that, fire it up and let's get started. So when you fire up fSpy, this is the screen you'll be greeted with. All you need to do is just drag and drop your image that you want to use into the interface. I've provided this particular image in the description so you can follow along exactly with me, or you can just use any other photo that you like. I'd recommend if you're starting out, probably start out with like city scenes because there's a lot of straight lines and that helps with the camera matching, but any photo really will do. So I'm just going to turn off this dim distance here just to help us see the image a bit better. So as far as fSpy is concerned, there's two kinds of images that it will accept. One of them is a single point perspective and one of them is a 2-point perspective. And I'll show you some examples here of one and the other. So based on that, we can see that this is a single point perspective image. We know that because we've got these straight lines here and they all kind of converge at one single point in the image. So that means up here where it says number of vanishing points, we just set that to 1. To make life a little bit easier later on, I'm actually going to switch these axes here. So number 1 axis will be Y and number 2 axis will be X. And the focal length we know from the photo is 70 because that's on the website actually where you download the image. So that's nice and handy to have that. But you can get away with not knowing it and just leave it on the defaults. So what you need to do now is just drag these handles and just line them up with any kind of parallel lines in the photo. So of course a street scene is nice and easy because we can just point these lines along the street here. I mean, you could, if you had straight lines along here, you could put one here and one here, something like that. You know, but in this example, our curb here is pretty straight, so we'll just use that. The second axis for a single point image is basically kind of your level. So you want this to be lined up to any straight lines in your photo that are actually kind of, they look like they're level. In this case, the front of this curb I think will do the trick. So let's just do that. Cool, okay. So you've got also this little point here and you can just put like a grid attached to it and you can kind of just drag it around, check the perspective looks right. So that seems pretty good. The other thing we can use this for is measurements. So we'll grab this, we'll put it at the bottom of her foot here. And then what we'll do is just set our reference distance here to be along the Z-axis. If you turn this dim image back on, you can see the little handle here that's appeared. And so you basically set that to what you want to measure. So it'll be, we'll just try and guess her height here. Let's call it 1.6 meters. Now, last but not least, we just need to place this origin point here where we want the origin of our world in Blender to be. So usually it means you probably want it on the ground somewhere. For this scene in particular, I think we can just put it over here at the corner of this curb. And I've had to move that handle out of the way so I can drag the point. So I'll just drag that handle back down. And that all looks pretty good. So let's save it. We'll go File, Save As. And then that file is ready to go into Blender. All right, so here we are in Blender. Let's just delete everything. Oh, wrong key. X, delete, cool. But what you'll need to do first is go to the fSpy website, download the fSpy importing add-on for Blender and install it. So once you've done that, you will have, if you go into the file menu, import, and you'll have an fSpy option right down the bottom here. Now we just go and pick our scene that we saved earlier. And there we go. Now to make our life a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is split this bottom window. And this is going to be our shader editor. And then I'm going to split this top one here as well. And this can just be a general 3D view, and this can be our camera view. Cool. All right. So let's start off with the ground. We'll add a plane. We'll scale it up. We just want to basically scale it so it kind of matches the ground in the photo. So something like that looks good. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can do camera projection in Blender. One of them is if you simply just go in the viewport, go into edit mode, push U, and then hit the project from view. And so that basically just will create UV coordinates for your object based on the camera. That's all cool, right? But the way I like to do it is actually with the modifier. The modifier, basically it keeps everything procedural, which I like. And it also is real time, like it updates in real time, and I'll show you what that means. Now, because this projection technique is based on UVs, it is influenced a lot by the amount of vertices you have in the object. So a good way to kind of help with that, I suppose, is to actually add a subdivision surface. But you set it to this simple mode here, so that if you just go into wireframe, we turn this up, it doesn't kind of smooth your object as you subdivide it, it just adds more faces. So that's good, that's what we want. And so then the next modifier you want is a UV project. And we're going to pick our camera here. And actually before we do that, let's name it something that makes sense. And I love this F2, you can just push it and rename stuff because I like keeping things clean. Let's call this ProjCam for projection camera. Click on our plane again, and then we'll pick that again. Okay, so that's good. Now, to test this, we're gonna make a quick little shader here. We'll just hit the new button. We don't want this principled shader. You'll get this gigantic node here. Just X to delete it. We'll name it BG. This is our BG image. So the way I like to work with the node editor is actually just Shift A, enter, and then you can just type stuff for whatever node you want. So you can just type emission, and if you push enter and then enter again, it'll drop that node down. So we want emission, we want an image texture. I think that's it. Yep, let's do that. So output of the emission goes into the surface. Image texture color goes into emission. Now this little drop down here on the image texture is what we want, and we're just going to pick this scene.fSpy, which is our image. Okay, cool. Now nothing's changed here because we actually just need to set this to be our look dev mode so that the textures will show up. And so we'll do that here. We'll do that here as well. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of looks like it's working. But you'll notice these, they all kind of look a little bit wobbly, like everything's a bit kind of distorted. So this is what I was talking about, the whole vertices thing, right? So to fix that, you just go into the subdivision modifier here, and you can turn this up, and you'll see as we go up higher and higher, the distortion starts to go away. The only other issue with this though, is you'll notice we're getting pretty high level of detail, but it's mostly in the kind of horizontal axis and not the vertical one. So I found the best way to fix this is actually just add in some edge loops. And we'll do this in solid mode so we can see it a bit easier. And I'll just make this full screen. So if you tab into edit mode, Control R, and then you can add some divisions down the street, and you want to get the faces to kind of be almost like as square as you can get them. So let's do that. That looks pretty good. Escape so we don't move them. And then we tab back out of edit mode. And now what you'll see is we can actually turn this viewport setting back down. And if you look here in the wireframe mode, now we have a bit more sort of even distribution of faces, and that's seems to be working pretty well here. Also, one thing you got to remember is if whatever you adjust in the viewport setting here, you also have to put that setting into render, otherwise it will render with all the messed up version instead. Now, one other thing the eagle-eyed people will notice at this point is it looks like the image is a bit wider than the actual source image. If you hide this, you'll see this is what it should look like, but then this is how it's being projected. What you'll need to do is go into these settings here and adjust the aspect, because the projection modifier doesn't know what the aspect ratio of your source image is. So you can just eyeball it like this, you know, use this scale X and bring that in here. Zoom in to check it. Okay, so 0.883 is what we have here. All of these modifiers, all of the UV projection modifiers that you use on all of your objects will have to have this same number plugged into there. So whatever it is, just take a note of it, and then you can just put it into all the objects. Okay, so let's, at this point, quickly save our scene before anything crashes. Cool, all right. So the next step that we're gonna do is we'll make these sides of the streets here. Now, the amount of stuff that you wanna model is really up to you. Like you could go crazy and model every single tiny little thing, all the trees, all the bamboo, all everything, right? But I say, start simple and then have a look at the results and then decide from there, okay, I'm gonna have to model this, I'm gonna have to model this or whatever. So that's exactly what we're going to do, and I'll show you how all that works, and then that will help us decide what we need to cut out in Photoshop and what we need to build in 3D in Blender. So we're gonna make an object here, which is a card. And this is just going to be a generic object that we can use, you know, we'll just duplicate it and use it as kind of a base object for the rest of our scene. So add a plane, and then RX90 to stand it up, GZ1 to put it up onto the ground plane, and then we just want to go object, set origin to 3D cursor, and that will just move the center point of our object onto the ground here, so that whenever we do a scale or anything like that, it'll just scale around the ground point here. So that'll be very handy. While we're at it, let's add our modifiers. Now remember, we need a subdivision surface with simple turned on. We'll turn it up to 2 to start with. Then we also need a UV project. Pick the camera. We can also just grab that material as well if we want to see what we're doing. No, not that one, the other one. Okay, that's cool. So if we move this around, we can see projection is working. Let's rename this, we'll call it card. Card, yep. And then to make everything else, we're gonna just be duplicating this object here. So Shift D, push escape. We'll pick this other card and hide it. And then just grab this. We're gonna RZ90 to move it to be along the street here. And we'll just scale it and fit it into place so it covers this side of the street. Okay, that's looking good. Now again, because we've got our, because of the subdivision issue, we'll just have to go in here. So Tab, Control R, make our faces square, something like that. And then back into this view here, we'll just turn up our subdivisions until everything is nice and straight and not wobbly at all. Again, set render to be the same. Let's save. Cool, so that's one side of the street. Let's Shift D, duplicate, lock it to X, drag it across to the other side. Now, I've forgotten something, and that is our little scale X here. So 0.883, copy that, paste it here, paste it here. And in fact, on our original card, let's paste it there. We don't have to worry about that again. Okay. And this is another cool thing you'll see with this kind of procedural approach to the projection is now I can actually just move this card back and forth, and I'm just moving it along the X-axis, right? And that's, we can just line that up. You can kind of see the curb here. You can just hold down Shift and just line that up like that in the viewport. That looks pretty good. And one last thing, let's grab this tab, push number 2 to get into edge mode. And we're just gonna extrude this edge along the X to be that, just that front of the curb here. Cool, all right. Now we're getting somewhere. Of course, let's name stuff. Now the next step is we want to put in just a test camera, like a test animation in the camera. This will just help us to kind of work out bug fixes. I mean, if you want to work out exactly what your camera move is at this point, awesome, go for it. But for this test, we're just going to do something nice and simple. So what we want to do is, because we can't actually move the projection camera, because you'll notice if you do, the whole projection moves, which is a pretty trippy effect, but it's not really what we're going for. So let's Shift D, duplicate that, name it, of course, and this is going to be our render camera. And then just in your scene settings here, in your camera, call this render cam instead of projection cam. So now this viewport on the left here is now looking through that render cam. And we're just going to go down here, set this to 100 frames long. Push home to reset your frame range here. And then we can just make a quick little animation. So here, push I, set a keyframe, and then go to the end. Let's GY, push this. We'll go pretty crazy. We'll push right in here just to help us visualize a bit better exactly what we need to fix in Photoshop. So that's all good. With these keys selected, like they'll be both yellow here, just go T, set it to linear, because we just want a linear move. And there we go. We can make this big. So now you can see, looking at this, exactly what things we need to cut out. And essentially it's the things that are distorting, right? So the girls here are on a kind of separate plane to the street. And so the bottom of their legs are starting to distort. Let me just draw on this here. So these legs here are starting to distort as it moves through the frame. The bottom of this pole here is starting to distort. And this sign as well, you can see it sort of starts off straight, and then as it moves along, it kind of gets a bit distorted. So at a bare minimum, I would say they're the three things that we're going to have to basically go into Photoshop and cut them out, and then we can map them onto separate objects. Can be just a card in the scene or whatever, but that will just stop those kind of distortion effects happening, and it'll also add a lot more depth and dimension to the photo because we'll get a bit of parallax going on. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. I'm just going to run through cutting out the women here, and then you'll be able to basically rinse and repeat for the other objects like the pole and the sign. So the way I like to do it is select the selection brush here on the left. And then in 2019, I think this is new in 2019, there's a select subject button. So you can kind of roll the dice if you like and hit the select subject and see what happens. In our case, perfect. Well, not quite perfect. If we zoom in here, it's done a decent job, but you'll want to just get in here with the selection brush and add and subtract to the selection to get a bit better result. You can use the Alt key to subtract from the selection. But as you can see, it's done a pretty decent job straight off the bat. Another way you can refine this as well is if you go into the select and mask feature button here, you'll actually get kind of a new sort of window that'll take over the screen. And you can use this as well to kind of add to the mask and so on. I like to work with the this view mode here to set to overlay. So you get this nice kind of red color here that you can really sort of see the difference between what you're cutting out and the background. And so then it's just a matter of, you know, going through here. We're still in the selection brush. It tries to work out, you know, where to select and stuff. I find maybe at this stage, you might want to just hit the normal masking brush here and just go through and clean up a lot of these edges. Now you don't have to be perfect here. And in fact, I would just say you want to get something kind of rough working, and then you can always go back and tweak when you're ready later. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up now. And once you're happy with what you've masked out, I find the best way to do this is if you go into output settings, output settings, go output to new layer with layer mask. And so that way when you hit OK, you'll actually get this new layer with the layer mask, like as it says. So I like to do this because it'll keep everything you know, non-destructive, and it means you can go back and edit the mask again quite easily. So that's one layer here. I'm just going to go through and repeat the process for the other two items that we were going to cut out, which is this pole and the sign. And just to bring the point home, at this stage, we're really not looking for perfection. You can see this sign here is pretty rough, right? So I definitely plan on going back and refining everything later. I think it's important to kind of just get everything into the scene, even if it looks rough, because sometimes you might not need to really refine things depending on the end result, you know? So this is a great way to kind of work a lot quicker. And then all you have to do is go back and refine the things that you need to refine rather than trying to make everything perfect straight away. Okay, so we've got our 3 layers here. I'm just going to name them real quickly. And let's take the opportunity now to just get in here and save our file. What we'd like to end up with is a layer for each object that we want to map onto a card. And we want to have a background layer with all of those things removed. So to do that, all we need to do is for each item we want to remove, we can just control click on the layer and that will give us a selection based on the mask for that layer. Each selection needs to have a little bit of a border, like expand it a little bit. So we'll put in like 20, we'll expand that out. So we just need to give it a bit of a margin for the content aware fill to work best. And then we just go here, content aware fill. And let's bring our preview window up a bit so we can see a bit better what's happening. And if you don't see this exact screen like this is brand new, I think, for 2019. So you might not get as many controls as this. The tool basically works the same kind of way. You just won't be able to do this next step. And that next step is basically, you can tell the content aware fill with this new tool what you want it to consider, like what parts of the image you want it to consider in the filling of the area that you're trying to get rid of. So you can see here, for instance, that there's this kind of sign has been kind of replicated over here. This lantern as well has just been replicated. So you can tell it, okay, I don't want the sign, and then it's gone. I don't want this lantern, and I'm just painting with the left mouse button here. And it's, you know, it's still not perfect, but again, we're not really aiming for perfection at this point. We just want to get something kind of roughed into a half decent kind of level of quality. And then we can always go back and refine things where we need to. Because sometimes this might be good enough, depending on how much of the background that your camera move is revealing. This might be fine for what we're doing. So let's not get too carried away at this stage. But again, what we're going to do is we want to make sure that this is outputting to a new layer so that we can keep everything non-destructive and it's easier to edit later. Okay, so there we go. That's removing those guys. And then again, as before, it's just a matter of rinsing and repeating. Okay, so let's have a look at the layers that we've made. So we've got here 3 layers called delete. And if we turn all of those on, this is our clean background plate. So let's export this. We'll go export as, and we want a PNG, but we're going to turn transparency off for this one. So then we just go export. We'll call it background. Okay, that's one down. So now we want to just turn off everything. And then each one of these layers is going to get exported. So we've got our sign selected here. Let's go File, Export, Export As. And for these layers, we actually want transparency to be turned on. So go Export All, we'll call this sign, and then just go through and do the other layers. Okay, now don't forget to save as usual. And now we're gonna go back into Blender. Okay, so in Blender, first what we're going to do is let's pick our existing background shader here. And we're gonna replace this image with the BG background image that we exported out of Photoshop. You can just hit the X to bin that off. Push open here, select BG. And this is our clean background. So now we have our nice street scene and no distortion. While we're at it, you'll remember the little card object we made before. So we're just going to duplicate that. We're going to need a card just to cover up the far background in our image here. Okay, that's done. Let's rename it. And let's make a card for the women in the middle of the street here. So again, duplicate our existing card, Shift D, kind of move it to around where they're standing in the scene. And let's just hide our original card and name this one. Now we're going to want to make a copy of our BG shader because we're actually going to do some modifications here to enable the transparency. So let's just hit this duplicate button here and we'll name it women again. We'll hit the little folder icon here and then we can pick the women image. And so straight away you can see the problem here. Obviously there's no transparency by default. So that's all cool. We will set that up right now. So we're going to need a couple of additional nodes. Let's add in a mix shader and we're going to add in a transparent BSDF. Now the transparent has to go in the top shader slot here. The emission goes in the bottom shader slot. The shader output goes into our material output here. And then we want to pull the alpha from the image and that will go into this factor setting here. We've done all that and you'll notice it's still not doing a transparency because we actually have to tell Eevee that we've got transparency in our shader and we want that to be considered in the render. You can just go to Options tab here, and this is in the N panel on the node editor. And then you just need to change this blend mode here from opaque to alpha blend. And there you go. The cool thing about this all being in 3D is you can actually look on the street and see where the shadows for these guys are. So that just makes moving things around a whole lot easier because you can kind of just pick this position here looks about right. I think this lady in the pink is a bit further forward than the others, so you can kind of rotate on Z-axis. We need to scale the card up a bit because they're getting a bit cropped. One thing you want to be careful of is any cards, 3D objects that you place in the scene, you want to make sure that if they sit on the ground that the actual point where they touch the ground is fairly accurate in the 3D space. Otherwise you are going to get some problems with like the feet sliding or stuff like that. Most of the time you might be able to get away with just making cards like we've done so far. But you may have to, depending on what the object is and the shape and stuff, you may have to do a little bit of modeling to make that actually fit properly. So let's just have a quick look at our scene now. And we can play the camera back and we can look here and it looks pretty good. The contact of the feet looks pretty good. Doesn't look like they're sliding too much. But you can see already that the 3D effect is really starting to take shape. So now we're just going to rinse and repeat for all the other objects like the pole and the sign, and we'll come back and have a look. So everything's in there now. It's all looking really good. I mean, even with our rough kind of cutouts and stuff, you can hardly notice at this stage. I mean, maybe when we render, you'll be able to see something, but for now, it's looking great. So let's get this ready for rendering. When you import the scene with fSpy, it actually sets up your resolution to be the same as the source image. Now, usually you don't want that. I mean, you know, if you want to render 3000 by 4000, go nuts. But we're going to set this to something a bit more sane. We can let's do Instagram resolution because that's what everyone really wants, right? 1080. This is our square Instagram resolution. Now, one thing to check is if you just go to frame 1, you'll see here now that we're seeing a bit of like outside of the image here. So that's a bit annoying. We don't want to have to go in and adjust animation and stuff like that, and you don't have to. All you need to do is just go into the render camera itself, and you can actually just adjust your field of view here, which is your zoom, and that will, and use that to kind of just crop into the image where you want it. So that's something like that will do the trick. And then when we play it back, that's looking fantastic. Now let's hit F12 and do a quick test render. Now, so one thing we've got here, you'll see this, the lady here has been cut in half. So what's happening is we've hidden our template card here in the scene, but it's not hidden in the render. What you'll have to do is go into this little filter icon, click the camera, and then you'll get access to all of the little render flags. And so then you just need to turn that off for the card, hit render again, and it's gone out of the render. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you like the channel, hit the subscribe button, and we'll catch you next time.